this is State Representative Roger Bruce with our second edition of Under the Gold Dome for this year. And today we have a very exciting conversation that we're going to have regarding the shutdown in Washington. And I shouldn't say in Washington because it's actually being shut down all across the country. And it's just originating from Washington. And we're also going to talk about the voting machines that we had to use during this past election, and some thoughts about how we fixed some of the problems that we had during that period of time. And my guests today, I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Rashawn Richgeorge. I'm a federal employee with the Federal Aviation Administration.
Okay, and you're talking this way. We're talking to each other.
Sorry.
Great.
Teresa Givens. I'm a furloughed federal employee as well.
Okay.
My name's Sara, Ghazal, and I'm the Voter Protection Director for the State Democratic Party.
Okay. And so we're going to talk about those two topics, and but we're going to jump right into this issue in Washington. And you know, today on the news they reported that they didn't have enough employees working at the airport, and so they had to shut down some of the flights. And if they continue to shut down flights, then they're going to shut down airports. And so this has been going on now for how long? Over
36 days.
36 days. And you know that because?
I'm a furloughed employee.
And so for 36 days you have not gotten paid?
No.
Okay. How is that impacting you and your family?
It impacts us in a couple of different ways. The first one is, I, like many people, we are a two-income household for a reason. We need two incomes to provide the life that we would like for our family to have, including our two minor children. And so without having access to pay, it has made us take a look at some of our discretionary spending, try to make arrangements on some things that you just can't go without, like food, shelter, heat.
Wow.
Those sorts of things. We have two kids who have chronic illnesses that, can flare up at any time. And so
Is this affecting your medical plan too?
we have medical insurance, that we have our insurance through my employment with the federal government. And so our plan is paid by me through payroll deductions. But we do have coverage for right now. It's just, do I take them to the urgent care? Do I take them to the emergency room for a $150 copay? Or can we wait till Monday and get in on a $25 pediatrician visit?
Wow.
So those are some of the things that, you find yourself trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. And in fact, it happened right before the holidays. So, when you have children, although they're not at Santa age, they still expect to, have a joyous Christmas. And though receiving gifts isn't the reason for the season, but as a child, it is a part of that experience.
Right.
And so I and my husband found ourselves trying to determine, okay, do we really need to have a Christmas that we originally planned, or can we scale it back and provide something different for them and still have a good, joyous time?
So, but the bottom line, it changed your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And have your kids asked questions about what's going on?
Oh, they know what's going on.
Okay. How old are your kids?
My kids are 11 and 14.
Okay.
They are.
What kind of things are they expressing concerns about?
For example, my daughter, my husband and I were just having our own adult conversations about how we were going to pay and do certain things. And Gabrielle, who's 11, came down with her Visa gift card she received for Christmas from Grandmommy and offered it up to be able to assist, to make ends meet. And we're like, no, we don't need that. And we didn't. But the fact that an 11-year-old was trying to...
She was feeling the pressure.
Yeah, to make sure that we were okay. I have friends in D.C. who had put a story together about how her 9-year-old knew that she had what he called a furloughed wallet, and his birthday's coming up this month. And he came to her and said he had $200 and some odd in savings, and he could put that towards a possible party for himself and maybe some people, his grandmother and uncles could come together and they could do a potluck, and he
Wow.
could still have a party. Now, this is a 9-year-old trying to figure out how he could assist with the family. That's not his job.
Wow.
That's not her job.
And what's your situation?
Well, I'm a one-income family, so I do understand exactly what Rashawn is saying, but I have to be concerned with paying tuition for a son who's at Tuskegee University.
Wow.
Fortunately, that's
And
covered.
Tuskegee's not going to waive the
Of course
their fee,
not.
right?
Of
Okay.
course not. But thinking about housing and rent and his utilities as well, ensuring that he has what he needs to be successful and not be concerned about a furlough. That should not be on his mind when he's trying to study and get his
Absolutely.
work accomplished. And I also have a 17-year-old high school student. And again, the same thing. He just celebrated a birthday, and he has his birthday money and says, well, what can I do to help Mom?
Wow.
But fortunately, we
Sounds like y'all both raised good kids, though.
We
They
certainly
wanna- they want to
our
help.
village has been wonderful.
Yes.
And that's good. Hopefully the village will grow as everybody sees what's going on and pitches in to help. Why don't we hear from you guys? We've been joined by my colleague here.
How you doing,
And
Representative Bruce?
I'm good. And why don't you tell everybody who you are real quick?
Representative Derrick Jackson. I represent District 64, which is parts of South Fulton and Fayette County.
Okay. And you've heard the conversation at this particular point. Well, what are you getting from the people that you serve?
Well, I'm hearing you're adjusting your discretionary spending, which means it's not just you. It's people who are expecting business from federal workers, and so there are ripple effects. And and you work for the FAA. We've got flights that are grounded. This is Atlanta, y'all.
Right.
We've got the Super Bowl in a week.
Didn't they announced today that several of the airports have delayed flights, canceled flights, and we, as you said, we have the Super Bowl coming, and this is the busiest airport already
Right.
in the world. We're about to get busier because of that. If this does not get cleared up, how safe is it going to be for people to fly?
Right. That's
Super Bowl.
a great question, Representative Bruce. And in my former life, when I was in the Navy, I was an air traffic controller.
Wow.
Right. And so, as a human being, our system is only as good as the individuals who are controlling these airplanes. And so, if you're thinking about the air controllers over from Atlanta to LaGuardia to Ronald Reagan, they're thinking about how are they going to feed their family, right? Keep the roof over their head or take care of their children that are in college. And that's the reason why it's been well documented that we're still safe, but we can't take that for granted. I mean, we have the potential of a security breach with TSA,
Right.
with the Super Bowl coming up, because the number of, TSA employees who are calling off for sick is up to 12% now. And so there's a possibility of a security breach. There's a possibility of safety. And so this the Oval Office is just a complete disregard of what's happening to, real citizens out there.
Wow. Let me ask you this. I'm assuming that you're in touch with your colleagues and others that have been impacted by this. And I'm sure that they're dealing with the same issues that you are. But what are you guys doing to try to overcome the issues that you're having? Are you pulling together as colleagues? And I mean, what are y'all doing?
Well,
Absolutely.
I have a great group of people who I work with, and I've now been with that same office for 20 plus years. We've had people who've come, who've gone, but the core of us have, I've always said we've grown up together. And so it was without any hesitation that, yes, we contact each other. We check to make sure that we're okay. We're a sounding board if we're having a bad day. We try to meet up. There have been a couple of different restaurants around the city here in Atlanta who have offered some, lunch specials for furloughed employees, and okay, let's get out the house and change our scenery and talk.
Right.
and see where we are. So we have done that. And another resource that we do have, we have a private Facebook group for
Okay.
furloughed federal employees called Furloughed Feds.
Mhm.
And this group they're only federal employees. It's private. We don't have anybody else there but us. We have been sharing resources of different things that we've learned as it relates to our benefits, to any type of assistance that's out there, to also giving a safe space to just say, I'm having a bad day.
Okay.
And there have been several people who have done that, and folks have been able to reach out and to kind of grab them up.
Yeah, you know, you have a situation where you're serving people too. So the people that you're serving are having issues now because they can't get the services that you are providing. But in addition to that, there's this total trickle down effect that everybody's feeling, because I'm assuming that your department also has people who purchase items. So now that stuff is not being purchased, and I'll give you an example. My son happens to be, he owns his own trucking company. And I was asking him yesterday about what was going on with him, and he said, well, Daddy, you know, the government is shut down, so I'm not getting the government contracts that I normally get to move the products and services. But not only that, the products and services that I normally move are not getting to the people that I was taking them to. So it's like a huge trickle-down effect. So what I was hoping that we could figure out today, you know, what are you hearing from folks in terms of the trickle-down? And the second part of that is the fact that you've been out of this for 38 days now, 39 days, whatever the number is.
36 days.
When you get back to work,
Right.
because this has to come to an end, when you get back to work, it's still going to be, you know, things are still going to be kind of chaotic, because you got to get caught up for what didn't happen for the last 36 days, right? So talk about that.
Well, in our agency, they've actually started to call people back. However, some of the people are not able to get.
What, call them back to work without pay?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thousands of employees have been called back to work. However, they don't have.
And are they required to come back to
Yes.
work?
Yes, sir.
And what happens if they don't come back?
They can be disciplined or
Yeah.
terminated.
So they're being asked to work without pay.
Yes.
There's
The last time I heard that was in relationship to what? Slavery?
Yeah.
Okay.
well,
go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't-
what
yeah.
happens
You didn't
is-
want to say it, but I
Right.
said it.
But what happens is there are certain segment that have been deemed as accepted employees, and they are in positions that for the health and safety of the public,
Right.
their service is required. And so what happens when we have a furlough is that segment of employee is required to work. That includes your TSA agents, your air traffic controllers. It can include people in law enforcement, in the prisons. Those people are required to work, and then once the government is funded again, they are guaranteed back pay. Now, for the other employees who are not in accepted positions, or they used to call it essential, those like myself, we are.
Doesn't it make you feel kind of weird though if somebody say your position is not essential?
Well, that's why they changed the terminology. We're not accepted. So we have to, when we get back to work, it's up to Congress to determine if they'll pay us back pay. And this last furlough, a couple days ago, they did in fact pass a bill, and President Trump signed it. So back pay will be coming. It's just, in the meantime, we gotta get through.
Okay, so and even if we do get through, the point is there's still a catch-up period.
Yes.
So there's still going to be a time when people, even though the government, when it does open up, and I think that I'm getting a message that there might be a deal pending right now. So even if it does open up, if it opened up, Monday morning, we would still have issues. Is that not? Is that correct?
Absolutely. You're going to have to deal with morale, number one.
Yeah.
We've been out of this for several weeks now, and it feels that we've been caught in between. And here we are, we've got to come back and we've got to produce and we've got to catch up the work.
And you got to act like nothing ever happened.
Yes, sir.
And what I've been hearing a lot from people is that they are really considering whether or not this is a career with public service that they will
really
be
want.
continuing. And I'm one of those people.
Especially since it's so volatile like this.
Exactly. It's never been this way.
Right.
You know, saying I worked for the government, it was safe.
It's-
But
not-
now
not anymore.
it's not anymore. And the thought that you could be a pawn
Right. That's not a pleasant thing.
it's not at all.
Let me ask you this: as a former military person, what impact are you seeing this having on the military? And to your point about morale and all these other things, this man is the commander in chief, and he's making these kinds of decisions. As a military person, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think, especially when you look at, for example, the state of Georgia, where we have 800,000 military veterans that call Georgia home. And so when you start talking about the commander-in-chief, how military veterans are perceiving the commander-in-chief, moral, respectful, integrity, right? And those characteristics are important, especially when you're asking men and women to go charge up a hill and they don't know if they're going to come home or not, right? It's a very different kind of situation than, public safety.
Right.
And so now you have a commander-in-chief that's tasking the military to go down and set up barbed wire on the border, which should not be
That's
really
not
be
the role
done.
of the military.
That's not the role of the military. Another perspective is, although the Coast Guard is not in Department of Defense, it's the Department of Transportation, but yet the Coast Guard, we see them as
But they
military.
still protect the borders.
That's
though.
exactly right. Maritime, they do drug interdiction. And so we see a commander-in-chief treating the Coast Guard in such a way to where they're not getting a paycheck. And they're still asked to go out and do search and rescue. So if you have Georgians who are off the coast of Georgia, they still have to go out there, they risk their life and try to bring them back. So it's very taxing to military veterans, much like it is to TSA and air traffic controllers, because there are some veterans who are serving in those spaces as well.
So are the air traffic controllers being asked to work without pay?
That's correct.
Okay. And I guess, just from knowing that if I'm on a plane and I'm depending on the air traffic controller to have his mind focused or her mind focused on landing this plane and landing it safely, I don't want to think about that air traffic controller sitting there saying, how am I going to pay my mortgage? How am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to, do all these things? I want you to be focused on how you're going to land this plane.
And that's an excellent point to highlight, because air traffic control is a stressful job to begin with. Right? I mean, you have someone that realize that they have citizens on an airplane that they, so it's a very stressful job to begin with. Now you add an extra layer to the point that you're making. How am I going to make sure the roof over the heads for my family and food on the table?
Wow. We're going to talk about, another subject that I think ties right into this in some ways. When you start talking about voting, all of this stuff has to do with voting and getting people to express how they feel. But before we actually go there, I want to see if there's anything else that you'd like to say, any message that you'd like to give to the people who can make a decision about putting you back to work.
I have actually reached out to my representative, Hank Johnson, and had a personal conversation with him last week about it is critically important that if we do have people return to work, please compensate them. They're having very serious difficulties getting transportation, paying for gas, and doing those things that are necessary to represent the agency and the organization. So we certainly need the federal government back open to serve the public, to complete our mission, and also to make sure that we continue to be valuable to society as well.
The only thing I would say,
Keep your mic open.
the only thing that I would add to that is that if you just take the politics out of it and look at the humanity, that these people, including myself, we are your neighbors. We can be your friends, your family members, people you go to church with. And regardless of where you fall on either side of the aisle, think about the human factors of what, a political decision is having on over 800,000 employees.
Wow.
So put yourself in their shoes and try to figure out, is this something that's worth it?
Right.
Wow. I did, we have, your mind goes in different ways. And I just wondered if everybody said, well, we're not going to stay in the Trump Tower, we're not going to buy any of those Trump clothes, we're not going to do any of that stuff till the government opens up. I wonder if it'll open up a little quicker.
No, because the Saudis will probably still rent out the hotel room.
But anyway, any last comments on the closing?
Well,
Or the opening, rather, of the government?
I hope these reports are correct. There are
Yeah.
too many people who are suffering right now. And too many services that are not being fulfilled. I mean, this is public safety. It's not. It absolutely is the individual story of every federal worker and everyone who depends on that. But it's the American public too. And how I see this tying in with voting rights is it's a matter of public confidence.
Yeah.
Does the public have confidence in the federal government? No, they can't. I mean, because our leaders have failed the American people.
All right. Did you have something you want to close it out? I can't imagine that you did.
No. Well, I mean, but I think you prompted a couple of great things, right? Because as elected officials, we took an oath, and when you start talking about how that oath should be received by citizens, and so I just think right now that especially those who are not speaking out and speaking up for their citizens, it's a dereliction of duty. And when I think about, Mitch McConnell, not bringing any of the 9 bills that Speaker Pelosi brought over, that's a dereliction of duty. The other thing, and you mentioned something I just want to make sure that we reframe, and I appreciate shows like this because you can't get caught up. Here's the reason why you can't get caught up, because it's not like when citizens go back to work, they're going to go buy 3 or 4 cups of coffee from Starbucks. Right. And so there's an impact in our economy to the tune of about $1 billion. It's more than 800,000 that are impacted, because if you take the average family of 3, now you start talking about 2.4 million, citizens are being impacted. And then there's the ripple effect, and then it
keeps going,
and it keeps going and going. Just like our agriculture right now is being impacted because that $12 billion that the person that occupying the Oval Office right now, that $12 billion is supposed to help agriculture, but those dollars are frozen too. And so
I've thought about agriculture. Who's looking after the food to make sure it's still safe? Who's looking after the water to still make sure it's safe? I mean, it's all kinds of trickle down. But all of this is impacted by who we vote for. And so the thought process is that I think that we should make it as easy as possible for people to cast their vote.
That's right.
And in addition to that, once they cast it, there should be things in place to make sure that the vote I cast is the vote that was counted. And I know in this past election, we had many circumstances where people were reporting that was not happening. You want to address that?
Absolutely. So over the course of the election, we ran a voter hotline in the Democratic Party. We had over 65,000 calls come into that hotline for people who had trouble casting their ballot. Either they couldn't make it to their precinct, their registration that couldn't be found, their machines were flipping their votes. They would cast their vote on a machine for one person, and it would flip to the other person. We had hundreds and hundreds of reports of just that. And so there's a massive crisis of confidence.
Did anybody try to explain what was going on there, or try to? How did we fix that? What happened?
Well, in some cases, we got the machines taken offline. In some cases, the voter didn't tell a poll worker about it, and they had to keep voting 5, 6, 7 times for the same case. In some cases, the voters were never confident that the machine took their vote properly. I can't tell you the number of cases we had where a voter said that they put the their card in. It popped out. They didn't press a single screen. It popped out, and the poll worker told them, "No, this is already voted now. You can't vote. This is done. You're done. You have cast your ballot. You don't get another
So
one."
basically, the card was not deleted before they gave it to them? Is that what was
I have
going on?
no idea. We have no way of knowing because nobody will let anyone else look inside those machines.
Okay, and none of these machines that were used in Georgia had any paper to back up the vote. Is that correct?
Georgia is one of 5 states that has no paper trail whatsoever with their voting machines. And that has been identified for years, for over a decade, as a massive security risk. We have no way to know whether or not those tapes, at the end of the day, the readout that they give are actually reflect the votes that were cast,
Okay,
because there's no way to audit them.
wow. So if there's no way to audit them, there's no way to see whether or not the ballot that you cast was the vote that was counted. What was the outcome on this election?
We know what's been published on the Secretary of State's website, and that's
So do we know whether or not there were enough ballots that fell into this category to affect the outcome of any elections across the state?
well, we know that in the lieutenant governor's race, there are over 100,000 votes that literally are just missing
Wow.
across the state.
And that could have changed the outcome.
That absolutely could have changed the outcome. And we can track where those votes came from because there's what's called a drop-off. So you can look on a graph and see, there were a few fewer votes for each for each down ballot race, except the lieutenant governor's race.
Wow.
It bottomed out, and only on votes cast on the machines.
Okay.
Because, absentee ballots are paper. Those were exactly like you'd expect them to
Okay.
be.
So there's going to be an attempt to at least remedy that in some way.
Yes.
I know that there's well, before we go, did you guys have any issues when you went to vote? Did you know about any issues?
This last election cycle, I was on a ballot committee for a local referendum in Henry County, where I live. And so we did have a lot of people report that they were having issues with either the ballot question not being on their ballot, that we only had 2 early voting locations. One was far away from most of the populace in Henry County, and the other location was only available for a short amount of time, and so the access to early voting was an issue for us there. So we had
We had
problems.
some problems we need to fix. I know that there's an attempt. We're all involved in it to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But before we go there, we got to kind of step back because I don't want to ignore this gentleman's question. Jackie B, that could be a man or woman, I guess, right? Jackie B says, how can Congress help avoid a shutdown in the future? Anybody want to take a stab at it?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. First off, I think there should be legislation to prevent one person shutting down our government. It should not.
That sounds like a dictatorship to me.
That's exactly right. So between both chambers, the House and the Senate, they should pass a measure that prevents the executive branch of shutting down the government. When you think about what took place in the last 24 months, where there's been not 1 but 3 shutdowns, and so if you do the forensics on each of those 3 shutdowns, it has simply been a dictatorship, right? Some people call it a temper tantrum, but I just think that to answer the question, we should have a measure in place to prevent the president of shutting down this government.
Especially if there's no real reason to do it.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about this event coming up on Wednesday.
That's right. And Representative Bruce, I'm so grateful that you have created this opportunity both for your fellow legislators and for the public. So we're bringing together vendors for new voting systems because everyone knows our voting machines are outdated, they're not functional, and they're not auditable. So there was a commission put together to make recommendations. It's called the SAFE Commission. But the recommendations that the SAFE Commission came out with were for basically the same sort of machine that spits out a paper receipt that you can look at. Now, what we're trying to do is make sure that representatives and senators and the public have an opportunity to look at all the options.
Right.
Because, in fact, every cybersecurity specialist and every voter who came to these meetings said, we don't want any machine at all. We don't need a machine to vote. We need a piece of paper and a pen. And then you feed that into a machine to let it read it, to make sure it's efficient and fast. Reporting is great. And there's modern technology that allows the counties to do tabulation at the precinct, but people just bubble in a piece of paper, just like they're taking a test.
Well, and it's kind of like, the piece of legislation that I'm pushing forward now will allow people, if it passes, it will allow people to vote at any precinct within their county.
Mm-hmm.
And with the technology that we have now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me for people to have to try to skip across town, from work to home to find a place to vote, where you just go in, you give them your address, and they print out a ballot based on your address, and then you fill it out, and then you put it back in the machine, or you
Right.
put it in the machine, and the machine will count your ballot, and then you still have that piece of paper, and you put that piece of paper in a secure box of some
That's right.
sort, and if there's any question about the election, you have that paper ballot that you can go back to and look at. Is that what we're talking about?
That's exactly right.
Did I describe it correctly?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay.
So next week, we've invited the vendors to come in and actually demonstrate what machines, what technology they have available, so that people know what we're talking about, and they have an opportunity to practice on these machines, see how they work, and they'll give presentations and try to explain why it is that their system is the best.
Okay.
But this gives an opportunity for legislators who are going to be voting on this and members of the public who are going to be using it. They'll be voting on it. They should have a say on how they vote in the future, because nobody trusts what's happened. The system was broken now. We're trying to fix it.
And what we had, state races, statewide races. We had local races.
Mm-hmm.
We had, city, county. Well, not city, but we had county races, and some of them were pretty close. So with these machines not working properly, is it reasonable to say that some of these elections may have had a totally different outcome?
Well, there are two election contests going on right now. One is a Democratic election contest. One is a Republican election contest.
Mm-hmm.
This has never happened in Georgia before, ever. And it's based on voting problems. And one of them, this is the second lawsuit on the same seat, same House seat.
Okay.
Dan Gasaway.
We're going to run out of time here in just a minute, but I really want to thank you guys, and I really feel for you and your families. I really do, and I know that everybody that's watching this and that all of us here hope that this comes to an end very quickly, so that you can get back to your lives and get back to taking care of your children and your family the way you want to.
Thank you for the opportunity to come on.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and we're going to put this, out, and we're going to do what we can to help you. But is there anything, last thing that you'd like to say before we end the program?
We have resources. I'm one of the federal managers, so we're looking to help those employees
Okay.
that are
Is there
having
a
to come
number?
in.
Is there a number of something that people can call if they need help that you guys have, or an email address, anything?
The federal government does have employee assistance programs, and although the government shut down, the EAP is still up and running.
Okay.
So I would encourage any federal employee who is finding themselves in a difficult situation to reach out. You can access it through your own agency's websites and call the EAP.
Okay.
Exactly.
Any last things from?
I guess the final thing, what you just demonstrated was compassion, and we not, when you hear that the Secretary of Commerce that says, to our federal employees who have been furloughed, just go out to the bank and get a loan. When you hear the daughter-in-law of the commander-in-chief that says, this little bit of sacrifice you're doing today, is just part of the process. And when you don't hear compassion from our leaders, that's a problem. And so what you just demonstrated was showing compassion. So thank you for demonstrating compassion, and hopefully that this will move 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to say that this is not simply 800,000 people you're impacting. You are impacting millions of people.
Actually, billions, because this our economy affects the whole world.
That's exactly right.
So I really think that what he's doing is impacting the entire world.
Absolutely. And we have 136,000 federal employees just in the state of Georgia.
Any last words on the event or things that we need to be doing? In fact, somebody did send a message, how can I become involved to help improve the voting process here in Georgia? That was one of the questions
Well,
that
you
came
can come down to the Capitol next Wednesday and take part in this event. It's going to be open to the public.
in. Okay. And that was Harold J. Whoever Harold J. is out there, I want
Love
to
to
give him
see
a shout
Harold.
out.
Absolutely.
It-
So absolutely, like I said, this is open to the public, and the whole point of this process is to help build public trust and public confidence in our systems.
Okay.
What
And
time next Wednesday?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock
But
here.
I hope and pray that you'll be back at work by that point.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. It's been a good conversation. I wish that I could call Washington and say open up, but hopefully, somebody up there will come to their senses very quickly and get you guys back to work. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And, Derrick, you and I got a lot of work to do, but it makes it a lot easier to do that work if you have people like you that are as committed to this as I am. And I appreciate you more than I can say.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. This is this closing of this edition of Under the Gold Dome.